Well, this is another one of those extra interviews that I do from time to time, and this time it's a continuation of the interview I did with Andy Peebles, the former Radio 1 DJ and of course a former PA man at City as well. Big City fan, and he was there the night when Colin Bell suffered his horrendous injury, effectively ending his career, though he did play again after that briefly. But in November 1975 against Manchester United in the League Cup, when City won 4-0, Colin suffered the injury after a challenge from Martin Buchan. Now, in Colin Bell's book, which I wrote, Reluctant Hero, this is what Colin says, actually, about that injury. I don't blame Martin Buchan for the injury, Colin told me. I know there are players in the game who set out to kick you and injure you if they can, but I don't think he was that type of a player. I was a little disappointed, though, that he didn't visit me during my time in hospital. If it had been me who'd done that to him, I'd have gone to see him, as long as I knew in my own mind that I didn't do it on purpose. Well, maybe a new insight into how Martin Buchan felt about that injury comes from Andy Peebles in the story he's about to tell.
In that era when I was doing the PA, there was no better sight in football than Colin Bell. I was there on the night that Martin Buchan clattered him. It wasn't an illegal challenge. Martin met me in the corridor. You remember the old main road, that if you got to the top of the stairs, Anita and Kay and the girls were in the office with Dermot Hawford. And if you turned right and went down the corridor, on the right-hand side was the players' lounge. And I walked down there at the end of the match, and Martin Buchan came out, and he walked down and he saw me, and he had tears rolling down his face. And I said, "What's the matter?" "Oh," he said, "you're the last person I wanted to see." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Because I'll have to apologise to you. It was an accident." And he actually put his arms around my shoulders and he was crying. And I said, "I'm very touched, Martin, I really am." And that, to me, was the great side of football, and that was the great side of camaraderie, if you like, in Manchester.
You know, the interesting part of that story, and I'm glad you've told me that because that's really revealing, is that you probably know that I worked with Colin Bell on his autobiography. And of course, integral to his story was that terrible injury. And I contacted Martin Buchan and asked him for some comments. And he was very, although I'd talked to him before, so there was no reason for him to be like this, he was actually quite defensive in the way he spoke. And when I talked to Colin, he said, well, he never came to see me in hospital. And even at the testimonial, Colin's testimonial, when Martin brought a United team and they shook hands on the pitch, there didn't seem to be any remorse. So listening to you tell that story is, to me, very revealing. And almost in a way, I wish I'd spoken to you about it at the time when I was working with Colin on the book.
I think the emotion that I saw that night was obviously instantaneous, because Martin would have realised that at some stage he would either have to have walked down those steps, got out and got in a coach, or maybe gone to the car park to collect his car. I don't know how United had got there that night. He didn't tolerate fools, Martin. He was quite tough. But his claim to me was that it was a 50-50 tackle that went badly wrong, and that he was very saddened by what had happened. And the tragedy of Nijinsky, as we all affectionately referred to him, was that he tried to come back and it didn't work, and that was almost as heartbreaking as the injury.
Just tell me, in your opinion, Colin Bell, which you saw on that dreadful night when he got the injury, but you also saw him in his pomp, how does he compare to the players of today, the Kevin De Bruynes, the David Silvas, the Yaya Tourés, this modern era? Because fans always want to compare the two eras. I know it's an impossible question, but in your opinion, was Colin as good as, better than them, or have City now, with those great players, surpassed Colin?
Well, it's a great question. I think he was as good as the modern players, but he played a different style. I mean, my memories of Colin were that he was a very forceful player when he wanted to be. He would get the ball and he would run through brick walls to get it up to the people in front of him, or to get in the box himself. Rather like Brian Robson, and credit to him. I mean, he could knock down walls, get in the box and score goals for Ron Atkinson at United in his golden era.
So is it like a physicality in the modern game that makes the comparison so difficult?
I think it's a style. I mean, here's a question for you. What would Kevin De Bruyne and David Silva be like if they were playing for Jurgen Klopp? Would they play in the same way that they play for the genius that is Pep? You know, City's reputation is built on a multiplicity of passes. I mean, I will admit that I sit, as I am now, I've got the test match on, I sit very often and go, oh, come on, more direct. Just because sometimes I just think there are 3, 4, 5, 6 passes, not too many, but, you know, cut it out and let's get forward. That's not the way Pep plays. And I understand that. He's done wonderful things. He's turned.
Who do you think would have adapted the best? Do you think Colin would have adapted to Pep the best? Or, so I'm reversing the same question back on you here. Or the likes of David Silva and Kevin De Bruyne would have been capable of adapting to the, no disrespect to Stan Gibson, but the less smooth snooker table-like pitches of those days, and the refereeing, which is all about no physical contact. Who would have adapted better to the other era?
I'll answer that in a minute. I'm so glad you mentioned Stan Gibson. Great story. There was a Saturday when City were the only club in the country at top level to play. And that was entirely down to Stan Gibson. And I phoned him. He lived in that little house, didn't he, next to the ground. And I said, Stan, it's Andy. Hello, lad. He said, how are you? I said, I want you to do me a favour. Will you be a guest tonight on my Radio 1 show? Don't be stupid, he said, although the language was a lot stronger than that. He said, you want to talk to me? I said, of course I blooming well want to talk to you. You're the groundsman who's got a ground that can be played on tomorrow. I want to talk to you about the undersoil heating. I want to talk to you. Well, he came on. He was absolutely terrific. I mean, he really was. So I'm sorry. Every time someone mentions Stan, that story comes back to me. I think we're being mildly silly and having fun doing it. I mean, I would never compare Fred Truman with Jofra Archer. They are two entirely different styles of bowler from different eras. And I don't think comparing Colin to modern day midfielders is really a good idea. I think we should just revel in the fact that we were lucky enough to have seen them all play in their respective eras.